I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming online.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the characters and plot to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and enjoy Stream On. Today, we'll be reviewing Begin Again, streaming on Tubi.
A collection of cliches meets in New York City and does what cliches do. Create a great work of art, grow as people, learn life lessons, and mend broken families. Okay, there's a little more to it than that. Greta is a singer-songwriter who is dumped by her more successful boyfriend. Dan is a down-on-his-luck record producer who is estranged from his family. They meet up, and musical magic happens.
Begin Again was written and directed by John Carney. The film stars Keira Knightley as Greta James, a songwriter, Mark Ruffalo as Dan Mulligan, a struggling music producer, Adam Levine of Maroon 5 fame as Dave Cole, Greta's ex-boyfriend and musician who has risen to fame, Haley Steinfeld as Violet Mulligan, Dan's rebellious 14-year-old daughter, James Corden as Steve, Greta's best friend and some comic relief in the film, and a cameo by the rapper CeeLo Green, who plays Trouble Gum, a rapper that Dan represented who's become very famous.
Okay, Steph, this was one of yours. Why did you pick this movie?
I can tell by your tone you already don't like this film, Jeff. So I picked this because we have not done a musical since Anna and the Apocalypse, which was way back in December timeframe. So I figured it is time for another musical in our Stream On collection of movie reviews. I also was curious if Keira Knightley could sing and if Adam Levine could act.
Let's see if those questions are answered. Let's get into the plot analysis. Steph, what would you like to start with?
I will start with Dan's character. I didn't particularly like how they went about developing Dan's character. And the reason I struggle with this is because in the hook, the film beats us over the head with Dan as this drunk deadbeat dad. I mean, it's just way too overdone. When you talk about hammer versus feather, which you've brought up in past episodes, this is very much on the hammer, like jackhammer. So we see him drinking from a flask while he picks up his daughter Violet from school. I mean, literally, dad of the year there, drinking from his flask. He also, at the same time, is popping pills. We don't know what kind of pills he pops, but he puts pills in his mouth and drinks from the flask at the same time. His daughter references the smell, like, why does it smell in here? And he lies and says he spilled gasoline. It's not alcohol that she smells, it's gasoline, and clearly she's not buying it. Then he waltzes in. I mean, this is all in the beginning, like 15 minutes or so. He waltzes into his record label called Distressed Records, intoxicated and looking homeless, and acting rude to people he meets, acting rude in the meeting. Like, I'd fire him too if that's how he was acting in a meeting with potential clients that I was leading. And then he gets fired and creates a scene by trying to pull giant artwork off the wall because he said he paid for it back in the day. I mean, it's just so bad and over the top. And then he ends up at a bar with his daughter Violet and drinking more. And then he ends up leaving without paying, which is a great lesson to teach your daughter. He tries to flee and then he gets punched by the bartender. And then to top it all off, if that wasn't enough to really hit you over the head with drunk Dan as a character, we see him sitting on a bench drinking from a paper bag. I mean, it's just way overdone. And, I don't know your thoughts, but this film would have worked much better if they had toned things down. He can still be down and out on his luck because of creative differences because he was cheated on by his wife with another artist, this and that. But the way Mark Ruffalo acts it as Dan and the way it's written is really started off this hook wrong for me. What are your thoughts?
The opening 50 minutes of this film are terrible. They are a mishmash of cliches, overacting, poor story beats, two lengthy flashbacks. Basically, the entire first act is taken up by a flashback for Dan and another for Greta that are supposed to show how they wind up at the bar that the film opens in. They come across as filler. They thought that by throwing cliches, Dan is the guy who used to be on top of his game, but is now an alcoholic and has lost his way. It's never clear how he could ever have been successful in anything. And even as the film goes on, and we start to get into the more interesting part, which we'll get into, it is not clear what it is he was really good at. We're told he's good at, but this is a case where we're told that he knew how to find the good acts and was really musically savvy. But being told that is different than a character demonstrating that on screen. And I think the film does a poor job of that. Greta is also a bundle of cliches. You know, she's the singer-songwriter who is the kind of heart behind the more successful partner in the relationship and is abandoned after a month of being in America. She is abandoned by him because he wants to give this new relationship a chance. And she winds up homeless on the streets of New York City. Now, she does have a friend that she can go to, and he plays a part in the rest of the film. But it does come across as the writer is presenting a bunch of writing 101 cliches, but presenting them as deep character traits and the foundation that we're supposed to care about for the second half of the film.
Wow. Okay, so you had a much stronger negative feeling about this film and the characters in general than me. I didn't like Dan's story arc. Greta's I liked much more, and I'll get into that later. But to get us back to Dan's story arc, because I still have some things to say about that. So it didn't start off very well, but they try to set up a redemption arc for him where he is now going to find a new talent in Greta that he found at the bar that night, and he is going to help her make it big and produce her album, which is this artsy album around New York City where they use the ambient noise of the city to do live recordings and some guerrilla marketing as they're creating this album. And so then you get into, I agree with you, the more interesting second half of the film where they are doing this artsy album. But where I struggle is that when they set up this redemption arc, okay, he's helping Greta, but secondly, he's trying to reestablish his relationship with Violet. And the way they do that is pretty lazy. So basically, Greta intervenes and suggests that Violet play guitar in one of the songs that they're doing on a rooftop, doing this ambient noise recording. And Violet is practicing her guitar, and Dan agrees to let her do it after a conversation. And then all of a sudden, like, Violet is like bonded again with her dad after 2 years of absent fatherhood where he's not around that much and picks her up drunk from school and this and that. All of a sudden, him asking her to play guitar in one of Greta's songs that he's producing just repairs all that. It felt fairly lazy, and it wasn't enough of a redemption arc. It wasn't earned, I guess I would say, is that him becoming dad of the year again to Violet, and then reestablishing his relationship with his wife he's estranged from because she cheated on him. Like, none of that was earned. It was way too clean of an ending for this dysfunctional family, and how much dysfunction they had Dan exhibit at the beginning of this film. Like, it would have made more sense to end with seeing Dan going to AA and slowly rebuilding his relationship with his daughter and continuing to support, find new independent artists, or maybe starting his own record label with independent artists. Like, you could have done something like that, but the ending was too clean for how you set up Dan's character.
Yes, and I would add that I don't think any of the story arcs or character arcs are earned in this film. This movie is so cliched. Although it's not really even that, because you can have cliched films that are satisfying. If you're going to go into, say, a romantic comedy and the couple winds up at the end, you're not going to necessarily hate it because of that, because you assume that's what a romantic comedy does. That's what that kind of story is. I don't have a problem with this idea of a guy in some industry who is on his way out or has lost his passion, his lack of creativity or personal issues that are hampering him, and he finds the new talent, the person who can help get into this industry. In this case, he finds Greta and he helps her get what she wants. He gets his passion back, which also helps kind of start to repair his family relationships. There's nothing wrong with that basic story. The problem with this film is that it's so lazy. Clearly, the writer thinks we are just going to see these things and they'll resonate with us because of what they are, what they represent in this kind of story, and then doesn't put the work in, though, to make those elements engaging, or by focusing on those aspects of the film which actually are engaging, are energetic, are lively. The first half of this film is a lead weight. It also doesn't help that the second half of the film getting into what you were saying, is that the redemption arc for Dan and the success arc for Greta do not feel like they are earned for these characters. It really just feels like it's seen as what is expected, so then they're put into the story. And I find that very lazy storytelling.
I do want to talk about Greta's character because I felt her arc was more enjoyable than Dan's arc. And I didn't mind what they did with her character. I didn't see it quite as cliched as you did. So I also enjoyed Keira Knightley singing. She sang in this film, which was, and some of the songs were good. Like Lost Stars was nominated for an Academy Award, and that is one of the big songs in this film. I will say it's Adam Levine performs it, and it's a nice performance to watch. I mean, Adam Levine is not much of an actor. I did not. He is a great performer and singer, which is why he's in this film, and he did do a good job with that ending where he performed Lost Stars.
I do want to take a moment to interject something. So let's take a moment. And this is kind of for the benefit of the listeners. With musicals or musically based films, and this is not really a musical per se, but music is a key component of this film, the storytelling, and that second act of the film is kind of structured like a musical in which the songs are important for the storytelling. I didn't like the music in this movie. I did not like the sound, and I don't like that kind of singer-songwriter folksy music. That becomes a part of a problem with a movie like this. If the music doesn't work for you, then you're not going to like the film as much. And I understand that it worked for you, but it didn't work for me.
I thought the music was. I do tend to like singer songwriter style music, but yeah, I thought it was catchy, and I had no issues with the songs, and it was really nice when you saw the band come together and like playing organically in the city. You had like a cello player, for example, and it was. I thought that was well done.
I do have a question about that. It's related to the musical set pieces in the city, where you'd assume you'd have a lot of ambient noise, a lot of, the urban background as part of the foundation for your songs. And then you have a movie in which the entire soundtrack is made up of studio cuts. And the reason I bring this up is to ask if you think it would have worked a little bit better if the music had incorporated a bit more of that street ambiance, the urban ambiance. The idea that they're actually doing this live.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like in terms of how the film was made, the songs were recorded in a studio, and then they acted it like lip syncing basically when they were live versus actually doing it live. Like maybe I don't know. I'm not sure if that would have made a difference or not, or if it would have been too distracting because you got too much ambient noise and that hurt your film. I'm not sure.
I guess some of this gets back to my earlier comment that in a film like this, if you don't like the music, or if like an element that, this idea, this urban background, if that's missing, and as the viewer, you're hoping that that should be in there, you're thinking that should be in there, like obviously I do, it detracts from my ability to really enjoy this film, regardless of any other issues like character and story.
Can you give me an example of, so because I liked the music, and I feel like this was an issue you had with Anna and the Apocalypse, if I remember too, is you also didn't like the music in that, which was quite poppy and more of a High School Musical sound. This is a little bit more singer-songwriter sound, but it has those pop overtones. What is an example of a musical where you like this sound?
Moulin Rouge. Now, that film, of course, has lots of covers of pop music, but I enjoy the songs more, and because of the opulence of the set design, the costuming, and the way the songs are integrated into the storyline, I found that those songs worked better. And because of that, I enjoyed the music more. It was more tightly integrated into a more visually appealing film with a more interesting story. In this film, because I don't like this particular style of music, and because the presentation of the songs seems to be detached from one of the main themes of the film, which is that you don't need all of this overhead to be creative, to make music, to make art, and yet all the songs sound like they are studio produced. They don't have that raw, rough edge that you would assume music being done on the streets of New York would have. For those reasons, I did not find the music in this film at all appealing.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. It kind of pulls you out from the organic nature of how they were trying to produce the songs. I I would listen to some of these songs on their own outside of the context of the movie. Like Lost Stars, for example, is an entertaining song. One difference between this and Anna and the Apocalypse too is these were original songs written for this film, as was the songs for Anna and the Apocalypse, versus Moulin Rouge. Most of the songs they took were from other artists already, and they repurposed them into that movie. There is, of course, the Moulin Rouge Lady Marmalade song that was written for that film, which is a great song. But that is one difference with that musical is
But anyway, before I interrupted with my trip down the musical lane, you were talking about Greta.
it was a good aside because in a musical, liking the music and what you think of the music matters because it is a key storytelling device. So, okay, so back to Greta and why I liked her arc better than Dan's. So, her arc starts off as she is a songwriter living in the shadows of her more successful boyfriend, who she learns is cheating on her, and she moved to New York from England to support him and his career. And they were this songwriting duo. And so she's kind of being left behind while he's rising to fame and screwing another girl. And she was actually like she was sort of like his trusty sidekick. She would bring him coffee and this and that, and really hadn't found her own way outside of being in his shadow. So you've got this terrible breakup. I mean, he breaks Dave, who played by Adam Levine, really breaks up with her, and as shitty a way possible, like where he plays her a new song he wrote for Mim, who's the girl that he now is having a relationship with, and he watches her reaction, and she can tell by how he wrote that song that he wrote it for another girl, and she picks up on the fact that he cheated. And I mean, this is like this. How evil do you have to be to break up with someone by playing the song that you wrote for the girl you're sleeping with?
The issue I have with that scene is that it is unclear how she intuits that he is having an affair from just listening to this song.
I think it was the words of the song as well as how he looked, and I don't know, what they implied in the scene is that the two of them had been together long enough that they understood what drove some of their songwriting, that she could pick up, like read between the lines.
Okay, well, that is a good enough explanation, but that is something that struck me as kind of abrupt while watching this scene. They do establish that this couple has been together for a while and that she has written some of the music that he sang and has become famous for. So I guess I'll give the movie that.
So so she's heartbroken. She goes and stays with Steve, who's the comic relief best friend, played by James Corden. And then he drags her out to a bar at open mic night to try to cheer her up after she's devastated by the breakup. And that's when Dan discovers her performing her song. And then we get the story arc of, Dan helping her produce this album. And the thing that I like about where we go with Greta's character is that in films like this, the woman tends to end up with one of the main male characters. Like in this case, either Dan, because you have a little flirtation back and forth between her and Dan, and you've got this nice scene where they are exploring the city at night together with a splitter so that they both can listen to each other's playlist on the phone as they're exploring the city. And it's kind of a cute, flirty scene between the two of them where they're bonding. And so you could easily, in a lot of movies that are written like this, she would either end up with Dan and Dan would leave the wife that was cheating on him, or she would end up back with an apologetic Dave, the rising musician, because he does come crawling back and apologizes and this and that and says he's, not good without her and all that stuff, right? But how this film ends to me is more satisfying. She doesn't end up with Dan or Dave. She ends up with her album, Her Way. She releases it independently for $1 instead of going with a record label. And she basically, makes her own way in life without needing a man or needing a record label. And to me, I found that a satisfying end to her arc in what typically is the female ending up with one of the guys. When Dave comes crawling back, she basically says F you to him. uh, and with Dan, there's sort of a nice resolution to that story in terms of her arc on it, where he helps her release the album and then that's it. But I liked that ending. It was more satisfying to me. So I didn't mind her arc as you clearly did not like it, but I did not mind that arc.
I will say I did enjoy that part of her arc. It is set up that she is going to, at some point, hook up with Dan. There is one scene, and I think it's after the wander around New York headphone scene that you mentioned, when they are back in her apartment. And it looks like they're getting ready to start making out. And then her friend pops in. That was played very well. There was some nice sexual tension between the characters. Comes across as, pretty natural. And I like that character arc didn't go where I thought it was, because every other cliche is indulgent in this film. So it's nice that wasn't done. But the character of Greta did have some issues. For example, I did not understand why she would even decide to speak to Dave ever again after what he did to her. There are some hints in their interaction in the third act that if she had done the right thing, she would have gone back to him, which is pretty horrifying.
I could understand that a little bit more because in terms of the time progression in the film, it implies that a few months maybe have gone by while he is rising to fame and doing his thing, and he's touring and she's producing her independent album. And so this was a relationship that was many years long where the two of them were extremely close and were a writing duo. They were creatives that were romantically involved. And so that takes a while to unwind emotionally. And so for her to still have some residual feelings there and want to meet up with him, if nothing else, to just see how he's doing, I to me that seems normal for someone that's had that level of a relationship with somebody.
I guess it has less to do with whether a character could do something and more how the character arcs are constructed, what we are shown, the way the breakup is set up, the fact that he is still playing her music, and he makes it clear that she is getting some credit for it, because he does say that. But he has changed her soulful music into some pop ballad that she hates. And this is all compounded by the fact that Adam Levine is a terrible actor, and the character comes across as a terrible mix of whiny and bland, which I guess is an amazing feat if you can successfully combine those two things.
I mean, they obviously casted Adam Levine because he's famous in Maroon 5. He's nice to look at and he can actually sing. But yeah, they did not cast him for his acting prowess.
But that is important in a movie. I get that there are people who are cast in films all the time who are not great actors. They are cast for the reasons like being musicians or models, or we've even seen a trickle of people coming out of the world of professional wrestling. Guys like Dave Bautista and The Rock, both of whom actually are okay actors and have a fun screen presence. But that kind of casting decision isn't always bad. It can lead you to discover someone who's actually a pretty good actor, or at least is, again, fun on the screen. The problem is that's just not the case in this film. Adam Levine just has such a weak screen presence. It is not particularly believable, given everything else that we know about the character and what we've seen of him and what we've seen of the relationship, that a person like Greta, who does not seem particularly weak or dependent, would even entertain the notion of contacting him, let alone potentially getting back together with him.
So it would have probably been better to cast an actual actor that can sing, someone like Bradley Cooper. Although he's a little bit older, but there are plenty of actors out there. Ewan McGregor, right? I mean, he was cast in Moulin Rouge as an actor that can sing. There are plenty of those out there that I'm not sure why they didn't pick one of those guys.
It's just such a lack of chemistry between the two actors. You know, we're told they're a couple, but quite frankly, it's hard to see that.
I would agree. They had very little on-screen chemistry. Keira and Mark had good on-screen chemistry, but definitely not Keira and Adam.
Well, and that's why the flirtatious stuff between Greta and Dan works, because those two actors worked well with each other. If there is something good about this film, and clearly I didn't particularly like it, I thought those flirty moments were very natural.
Mm-hmm. To the point that you thought, and so did I, that they were going to end up in bed together, and the film played against expectations there. Anything else you want to say about this film, Jeff?
I do have a scene I want to bring up and get your take on it. The opening act of the film, as we discussed, is made up of two lengthy flashbacks that are going to get those two characters to the moment the film opens. And then Dan approaches Greta after her performance, and he says, "I liked your music, do you want to get a drink?" Everything is fine. She's in a bar. Why not hang out with this dude who's going to buy you a drink? I have no problem with that. But when he starts interacting with her, he starts by saying she's really talented, but then he starts acting in a much more aggressive fashion, like what kind of clothes she needs to wear. She calls it out, but it's not clear why she keeps interacting with him. The problem is, in the context of the scene, it's an open mic night in which drunk Dan approaches Greta, who, as we learned, didn't particularly want to be there anyway. He claims to be a record producer. He's obviously heavily intoxicated. He gets a bit aggressive with her, and then she agrees to contact him the next day, even though this is the night before she is supposed to head back to England. Oh, and then I started wondering about her visa status, because I wonder about things like that when I'm watching movies. I mean, should she be deported?
Yeah, you have to do a bit of hand waving there to say, okay, she's really not in a good mental state. She's down and out because of what happened with Dave. So is Dan. And so it's kind of like a F it, why not? I'll have drinks with this guy. And then she did find out that he produced some famous people, so that may have been something that hooked her back in, and she decided to see, like, she didn't really have a lot else going on, so it was one of those, well, let me see where this goes, because I don't have a lot of other options going on right now other than to go back home and eat a tub of ice cream and cry, right? So you have to hand wave it a bit, but I was okay with it.
Earlier, you had mentioned that you thought Mark Ruffalo's characters played too broadly. Do you think this is a scene where that played into where he played too broadly and too aggressively?
Overacted.
Actually, that seems to be one of the real problems with this film, is that every actor seems to be going for a different tone. Levine is just floundering on the screen. Keira Knightley is playing it fairly straight. Ruffalo's chewing scenery. Here's a question that ties into some of the character and plot issues that we've been talking about. The movie is clearly supposed to be a love letter to New York City. You get to see all different parts of the city. There's a really good scene where Dan and Greta are sitting on a bench. It's the middle of the night. They've been walking around the city with headphones on, and they're sharing a playlist. And the music is providing the soundtrack for the city. I think that's probably what the movie should have been about. It should have been a lighter film that's following this group of guerrilla artists as they're going through the city and making this album, and just cut a bunch of the cliched stuff out. I don't really care if Dan winds up with his wife, his daughter at the end, because I don't really care about his story arc, because I don't think that's really what this film should be about. Although I know you like this film. I wonder what you think about that. Would this film have worked better if you had cut out some of the extraneous or more cliched character beats and instead focused on those aspects of the film that have more to do with both how awesome New York City is, but also just more the creative processes these people are going through and the fun little adventures they have running around the city as they're making their, urban album? Do you think that might have worked better, or did you like the focus of the film and did you find those character moments engaging?
I think that could have worked better to make this a stronger film. I also would have focused a lot more on adding depth to Greta's character, because I see her as more of the star than Dan in this film, and fleshing out, what she's going through internally, feeling like, she wrote all these songs for this guy that cheated on her, and now he's the star and not her, and going deeper into that, and what fame does to people, what feeling like you're on the sidelines of that fame does. Get a better actor to play Dave and flesh out his character more. And then Dan can still be there as a catalyst, but it's more about Greta's journey than Dan's journey.
Right, because structurally this movie is about Dan. The film opens with Greta playing in the club, and then we see Dan in the audience. But then we get a lengthy flashback about him instead of an initial flashback on Greta. That should have been the focus of the film, I agree. There's nothing wrong with having the, mentor figure, the guy who's failing in an industry, but he still has, the talent, the chops to see and identify a up and coming person, but make him more of a secondary character instead of trying to have two primary characters moving forward in parallel.
Yeah, I agree. Stronger emphasis on Greta, and have Dan be more of a side character, and flesh out what's going on between Greta and Dave would have strengthened this film. Okay, well, shall we get into the wrap up?
Yes, let's do that. So, what is your favorite scene?
So my favorite is a scene towards the beginning called the that I'm calling the ghost band at the bar. So after we have the two flashbacks from Greta and Dan's perspective, we end up back at the open mic night in the bar, and we see Greta performing on stage, but we see it from Dan's vision, where she's performing alone with a guitar. But then we get Dan imagining what she could sound like if she was produced with an entire band behind her, with a piano, a cello, a violin, drums, and we see these instruments being played by a phantom band. And it's this nice whimsical moment, where layers start getting added to Greta's song that improves the richness of the sound, and also just seeing inside Dan's head of how he's envisioning what Greta could become with the proper band behind her. And I thought it was just kind of cool seeing like a, a phantom playing like the cello. So that was my favorite scene. What about you?
For that, I turned to the rooftop session. I thought it was a fun, energetic scene. If the whole movie had had that kind of fun vibe and energy, I would have rated the film higher, even if I didn't like the music, if it had had that energetic feel to it. Okay, so what about your least favorite scene?
So my least favorite scene, this will not come as a surprise, but the beginning with drunk Dan, and particularly the scene where he gets fired and he is at Distress Records and he's just acting a fool. He's trying to take a client list off the computer, then pull a large framed work of art off the wall. So over the top. And for someone that was set up to be at one point a very successful record producer and executive, for him to act like that just didn't work for me. What about you?
Anything with Adam Levine. Even though the character of Dave is only on screen for about 10 to 15 minutes of the film, his relationship with Greta is an important part of the story. It is important for her character arc, and it's important because he and his actions are the instigation for her to meet Dan and make the album. His acting is so weak that I found all those moments detracted from her story. So anything with Adam Levine just is a tie for worst parts of the film.
He should stick to music. Good with the voice.
So from 0 to 5, singer-songwriter pandas, what are you going to give? Begin again.
Obviously, I like this film much more than you. I gave it 3 pandas. This film, to me, it's fun. It's a nice musical romp through New York City. I liked the song, so that obviously increases my rating. Lost Stars was nominated for an Academy Award, and I would recommend listening to that song, even if you don't watch this film. I enjoyed some of the montage scenes around New York with the splitter and the getting the band together. I didn't like Dan's story arc, so it lost points for that. Bland acting by Adam Levine lost points for that. I did appreciate where they went with Greta's story arc, not ending up with Dan or Dave at the end. So it gained points for that. So overall, I would give it a solid 3 and recommend this one as a nice musical escape film, an ode to New York. What about you, Jeff?
Well, I gave it a single panda. There are some nice individual moments, I agree with that, but none of them can save the fact that the first 50 minutes of this film are a slog through a boring mass of cliches. And the whole film is very predictable, other than the decision to not have Dan and Greta hook up. There are just better musicals out there. I would just say, go and seek one of those out. Go check out Moulin Rouge.
So, Jeff, what do we have coming up next week?
So next week, we'll be reviewing We Are What We Are, currently streaming on Shudder. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2021.